Or I'll show someone else's baby's pictures.
Yes, exactly. No, it's Elizabeth. She's not here at the moment. I'm sure she'll be around.
Well, administrators can't tell the difference between us if you guys need to sit up.
Yeah, you can. Really?
Idea.
Cannot tell the difference.
Cannot tell the difference. It's amazing.
Oh, really?
She's so tall, and I'm missing a leg.
You're assuming a lot. Who's looking at your legs?
Can I ask you to help me get another bottle? My blood pressure keeps bothering me.
Okay.
Or I can just plan it right here, fill this up when I'm done with it.
Oh, I can fill it up.
Well, it's almost full.
I'll go see if I can find some at the other place.
I
Okay.
can.
Where?
Yep.
You just get set up. I'll be back.
Okay. I was about to ask if there was somewhere I could sit while I'm filling this. Yeah, that'll be good. I'll stand when I can, but then I want to make sure there's some audio. If it's not going to work, that's fine. I forget.
He says with
I forget
confidence.
because I'm a musicologist, so everybody always says audio.
This was like an older man. I was like, that was
Who's doing? Is Ashley doing intro or? Oh, Ace, you're doing it. Was it a good time? I'm kidding. So your note is co-wrote on paper with AI.
And it's not even really, it's inviting our viewers from this special
So I do have. I don't know if y'all like having show and tell materials, but we have show and tell materials. And these people can just tape if they would like them. These are like a couple prints old, unfortunately, but that's what we have. No, thanks, Joe, for being flexible. I need to come with a trip time warning later. Thank you. It's kind of my fault for being a little vain. If I had just let my hair be greasy and not take a shower, I wouldn't have had my blood pressure drop out. Okay.
Check, check, 1, 2. All right, wherever. Do you have a pocket in your jacket at all?
I do if I open it. I never did.
Yeah. Yep, just my luck. Keep it in there.
Absolutely.
Go in the inside. If you mind.
Yeah, no, wherever you want to do it. If you'd rather go in the shirt, I can do the shirt too.
I can make it work. Like right.
Perfect. Yeah, as long as it'll
Right there.
pick up a
All
little.
right, cool.
Thank you.
Want to rehearse your slides and audio quickly?
Sure. Looks like it's going.
Joe, the Pearl just crashed.
Oh, this is being weird. But it's just not playing properly from here.
Oh, yeah.
So I may just pull that out and YouTube, which is fine. But yeah, looks good.
Great. Ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Thank you all for coming to the last seminar of the semester. Today we have Elizabeth McLain, and to introduce her, we have Ace.
Hi, everyone. Is this mic working? Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Thank you all for being here in person and online.
You need to unmute your mic.
Hi, is this working?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Thanks for being here. Happy Friday, happy afternoon. I know it's a particularly busy time of year, so really happy to see everyone here and online for the last STS seminar of this season. And so my name is Ace Wang. I'm a grad student in STS, and I'm very delighted to introduce you to our speaker today, the multi-talented Dr. Elizabeth McLain. Dr. Elizabeth McLain is an assistant professor of musicology and the director of disability studies at Virginia Tech. She's a scholar of music and spirituality in the 20th century, and her lived experience as a chronically ill rollator-wielding autist compels her to transform music scholarship through the principles of disability justice. And she's had the privilege of shifting her career towards community-driven research, which has included working with our very own Dr. Ashley Hsu on the Disability Community Technology Center through a grant from the Mellon Foundation. Dr. McLain also leads Open the Gates Gaming, and with the support of an NEH Digital Humanity Advancement Grant and an ACLS Digital Justice Seed Grant, Dr. McLain's A2RU's Groundworks team has documented the inaugural Cryptech incubator with an emphasis on ethical consent processes and access. And she's recently published work including Unseen Sounds, One Step into the Blind Future with Andy Slater and Leonardo. And recently was the guest editor for a special edition of A2RU's Cripping the Arts.
Oh yeah, Cripping Creativity and Play.
Yeah,
no, that's
you do a lot.
It's in process. I do a lot. Thank you all so much for inviting me. I was a little shocked at first, and I think I've asked several of the graduate students why, or which part of my work they were interested in, because being a musicologist and disability studies scholar, I was like, is any of this technology? And then Ashley Hsu has to remind me it's all technology. There's so much technology everywhere. But yeah, today I want to draw a little bit on a musical metaphor, but not too heavily, I promise. In harmony versus counterpoint, really to talk about transdisciplinary collaboration and community-led research. And this is going to kind of be two parallel talks in one sense. One is I want to share with you a bit about Open the Gates Gaming, which is the project that falls under the Disability Community Technology Center, which is part of the Mellon grant that Dr. Hsu is PI for. Y'all don't do that here. You use first names, don't you? I can call you Ashley here. Yeah. Music is really formal sometimes, so I always have to check in. The grant that Ashley leads, this started, I think, really as a footnote in that grant submission and has quickly taken up most of my time on the grant, for better or worse. So I want to talk about it as an example of a community-led project, look at some successes, and I also want to talk about some failures with it, because I think that honesty and transparency is in some ways more helpful. You don't always need to know where I succeeded, but where I failed may give you a leg up. Or 1.5 legs up. Yeah. Along the lines of that, I want to talk about why we do the work and how we do the work, because that's become the most important part to me. Because there's so many different outputs from this particular project, but that broader principle of remembering the why and thinking about the how is really the second focus of this maybe not focused presentation. I want to think about what we can learn about collaborative transdisciplinary research. That notion of harmony and counterpoint I'm going to bring back, and it's really talking about agency when you have multiple voices in the room and how those voices relate to each other. And I want to conclude by defining the access forward approach. One of these phrases I kept using over and over again, and only when my collaborators pushed me to define it did I realize that I made it up. So I'm in the process of trying to define it and clarify it, hopefully in ways that would be helpful for any of you who are interested in doing research of this kind. But I think the best place to start is actually at the end. I'm going to get emotional talking about this, fair warning. I'll talk through it. But a few weeks ago, my wildest disability justice dream was realized while we were in Boston at PAX East 2026. When this project started a few years ago, I spent a lot of time thinking about, where would we want to end up? And doing that business of wild dreaming that people in disability justice work like Leah Lakshmi, P.P.S. Nasemara Singha talk about a lot, the importance of dreaming and imagining a better future or many better futures. And to me at that moment, the biggest thing that I could imagine was a non-speaking person being able to play Dungeons and Dragons with friends. Someone who is among the most marginalized in the disability community. And if we could get to the point where someone like that could play, could be a hero, could tell a story, could slay dragons if they want to, sweet talk a princess, any way they wanted to live out their heroic fantasies, I felt like that would be it. That would be everything. So I want to introduce you to Annette and Annette's character, Raging Janet. So this picture has two players with us, Annette with the devilish grin on the left, and why am I blanking on her friend's name? But her friend on the right. Both of them are kind of retirement-ish age, if we can call it that. They're both black, and that's a woman. Her friend here is a man. They're in power chairs, and they both have cerebral palsy. So one of the great joys of the Open the Gates Gaming project is we get to go to industry events and create spaces like this Access Forward Gaming Lounge where people can play together. They had come in the first day with a group from United Cerebral Palsy Metro Boston, and they were there specifically to try out some video games, which is what we had offered in the morning. We would stop the video games and in the afternoon shift towards things like tabletop role-playing games to kind of control the sound in the room. The first day they came in, they had so much fun, but then they were kind of peeking at these tables where other games were being set up, and they wanted to play them, but they had to go. They had a limited amount of time they could be there. I am incapable of looking a disabled person in the eyes and telling them they're not allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons. So I grabbed my student worker, Dakota Vaughn, who many of you have worked with in other contexts and on the McLain project with Disability Forward Research Consulting. Grabbed my student Dakota, and after an incredibly long day, Dakota learned a new mini module that a community member from New Hampshire had created for us and turned around and ran it for this team the next day. The way that Annette communicates isn't even with some sort of fancy version of AAC or adaptive and augmentative communication technology, but with a letterboard. So it's a little hard to see, but on her tray here, there's basically a laminated piece of paper that has individual letters, and then there's a second smaller thing that has a green circle with yes, a red circle with no, which is actually her primary way of communicating. Thanks to the tools, thanks to the countless hours that disabled people have put into guiding us and telling us what works and doesn't, we were able to help her create a barbarian, which she named Raging Janet, and she was most excited about taking a battle axe to some zombies. I just sat in the corner and tried to cry quietly instead of loudly because I couldn't imagine that we'd actually gotten there. So let's back up to where this whole thing started, which 2022 feels like a long time ago, but I guess it really wasn't that long. We were, in many ways, still in the height of COVID-19 pandemic, and there was a lot of research coming out suggesting that there was this parallel mental health crisis from the folks who were enduring ableism through that pandemic. This one study in particular really haunted me. This was published as a collaboration between some researchers at Yale and Oregon State, and they were gathering research from October to December of 2020, and then there was some follow-up after that. Of the disabled people that they were following, 61% of them met the diagnostic criteria for like a probable diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So we're not talking about just a little bit of depressive symptoms. And 50% of them were meeting similar criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. These are astronomically high numbers from a population that was already facing a lot of problems. And the risk factors, social isolation, that one made a lot of sense to me. People whose disabilities were more heavily stigmatized, especially during the pandemic. But also younger people were getting hit harder, which is the inverse of what we often see in this type of reporting for mental health among people with disabilities. You see something like this and you're like, I don't know what I can do. I am a musicologist, I analyze music, I find different chord progressions and assign it cultural meaning and wonder if I'm doing anything in the world. But our local disability community here, they were the ones that gave me and all the many people on my team an opportunity to help. Because at the same time, Dungeons and Dragons was becoming even more mainstream, thanks to being on the show Stranger Things, but also the emergence of these like actual play podcasts, because people were stuck in their house and listening to other people play Dungeons and Dragons for 4 hours was suddenly super entertaining when it was professional voice actors like from Critical Role or something like that. And there was also a startup that created a website called D&D Beyond that made it easier for people to play and more compatible for them to play online, on Zoom, on things like that. So it was kind of a perfect storm of Dungeons and Dragons being more popular, but disabled folks were left out of this. And our local disability community, they wanted in on the action, they wanted to play. But the game has a lot of barriers, and I'm gonna detail them in a second. The important takeaway here is that they were being told, well, maybe this game isn't for you. How about you just go play this other system? Kids on Bikes, and those systems are great, but they wanted to play D&D with everyone else. And the second thing they were told, like most frequently, was, well, you can just like change the rules and make them easier. But they're like, we don't want the kids' table. Like, we don't want to be infantilized. We want to play the game with everyone else. So this became a potential way for us to help with this broader problem, at least locally. Some of you are probably wondering why I'm talking to you about Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to back up a bit. Dungeons and Dragons falls in this genre of tabletop role-playing games, which is often abbreviated TTRPG. Sometimes these are called pen and paper games, but there's a huge number of these different ways to play, but what unites them is that players will tend to describe, either in writing or speaking, what their character is thinking and what their character does. There will be some rules that will determine what happens next, and then there's usually a randomizing agent. So, 20-sided dice are kind of quintessentially in this genre, but sometimes you're flipping coins. Sometimes you're using playing cards, like solo journaling ones. They love using decks of playing cards that you can shuffle, but something randomizing it so you're not just getting what you want every time. These can be collaborative storytelling. There's also a lot of strategic planning. Some are focused more on introspective journaling. You have skill tests, speed trials. You can have all of these elements, none of these elements. There's a lot of diversity here. But Dungeons and Dragons in particular is the most popular tabletop role-playing game by a ridiculously large margin. It was first published in 1974, and the current version, we could argue if it's called 5th edition or now 5.5, because in 2014, they entered the 5th edition of their rule set, and in 2024, they announced an updated version of that rule set that's supposed to be backwards compatible, but actually isn't, and they said wasn't 5.5, and now their own websites sometimes call it 5.5, so who knows. But either way, we're in this 5th edition, and the basics are that your character is going to have 6 core stats that represent who they are, strong they are, how fast or dexterous they are, their constitution, their overall kind of health or ability to take a hit. but also things like intelligence, which is very book smarts in the system, wisdom, street smarts, and their charisma, the force of their personality. Based on those stats, you'll have other skills that your character will be good at. They tend to line up quite a bit based on what class you're playing, which class is sort of a stand-in for a job or an occupation. It's a lot of times your role in the adventuring party, and there's 12 of those, each one with their special abilities. Then on top of that, you have what used to be called race and is now called species. That's talking more about your character's physical appearance. Are you an elf, a dwarf, a human, a halfling? Because the Tolkien estate owns the word hobbit. But we were talking to someone last night on our live stream who's playing a little possum guy. Just a little possum guy. So there's a lot of creativity in that. But you can already tell this is a lot. This is intense. A game typically follows, I could not get this slide to go in the new format, so I lifted it from an old one. Dungeons and Dragons has kind of like 3 pillars of play. The first one is exploration. So the person running the game is called a dungeon master, and yes, I know that phrase has another meaning, and we don't have to talk about it today, but it's abbreviated DM. So I'll just use that. The DM makes a world for you to explore. So you can look, you can smell, touch, investigate, climb, pick locks, or pickpockets, study texts, befriend animals, make music, flirt. There's so many jokes about trying to like seduce a dragon. Whatever you dream of, you can try to do in this world. The second pillar is social interaction. So the DM is going to fill the world with a bunch of characters. These are often called NPCs or non-player characters. A lot of different people that they will inhabit that you can interact with. And then the player characters or PCs will take turns talking to them or in other, maybe even fighting them in some cases, but for social interaction, mostly talking, trying to read their emotions, trying to trick them into something, persuade them into something, that kind of thing. The last pillar, and the one that I think is a little too focused on right now, but that's just my opinion, is combat. So you can fight. If you want to fight, you can get in a fight. In Dungeons and Dragons, this might be pacifying a monster, it could be confronting a tyrant, and you can even take on gods. In combat, you can use weapons, magic, or your wits to survive. What's interesting is you don't have to kill. You can always choose to be non-lethal, but this gives you a sense of the scope of all of the things available to a player, which means Dungeons and Dragons is both good. I mean, you're telling stories together. You can imagine better worlds. You can build community at the table that then bleeds into real life. There's a lot of research about Dungeons and Dragons helping develop empathy, making those friendships, potentially improving mental health. It has a growing body of research discussing its therapeutic applications. And there's also a lot of folks that focus on developing math and writing skills, so there are educational applications for it. But there's also a lot of things that are not so great, especially if your body or mind is not the kind that this game was designed for. There are so many rules, there's so much math in it, and it's like a lot of small digit arithmetic under pressure, which even in people that are great at math, that might not be your thing. And there's a whole history and legacy behind this lore you're supposed to remember. We encountered decision fatigue and decision paralysis as 2 of the primary complaints that were emerging from our local community. There's too many choices to make. We get exhausted making those choices, and we get to the point where we're just freezing up and we don't know how to choose. Social anxiety is another big problem that's compounded by if you don't know the rules and what activity you're doing, it's just kind of adding to that stressor. Folks with dyslexia or dyscalculia struggled in particular. But at the end of the day, it also just takes too long. A lot of parents, people with careers, people that don't get a lot of nights off, they want to be able to hop in and just play, have a good time. The last piece of this is really important to being in rural Virginia. There is a dynamic of potential social exclusion based on where you live, or if people like you play, or people with your characteristics are perceived to belong in this community. Can you even find a place to play? So this was the background against which we formed Open the Gates Gaming, with its focus on neurodiversity, disability, and at the end of the day, community. We've had the support of the Mellon Foundation, but also ICAT here at Virginia Tech and AAD, university libraries. There's a lot of other entities I'm probably forgetting. I'll try to pick up along the way. When you're faced with a challenge that is this big, though, it's like, where do we even start? How do we make these decisions? Where do we put our priorities, our time and effort in? The thing I always come back to is you have to start by finding your North Star. And we talk about our North Star a lot, potentially ad nauseum. I think some of my team members might twitch when they hear the phrase North Star because they know there's a big conversation coming about what matters to us. But at the end of the day, you have to remember what your essential, most important thing is, because every decision that follows that has to be made in relationship to your priorities. So in 2022, we named that for us, it's disabled people being fully included through gaming. It's shifted more, though, towards a focus on community, but it's the articulation of kind of, here's our goal, here's our North Star, where then we can pull out a set of values. So for Open the Gates Gaming, the values, we've got 5 of them, and we think about them a lot. We are in the process of trying to construct custom Dungeons and Dragons subclasses based on each one, because of course that's what nerds do. But the first one here is that everyone is a storyteller. The corollary to this is that right now not everyone gets to tell their story. Tabletop role-playing games are a great way to tell stories together, but there were obstacles to just kind of starting to get that out. I mean, when I was diagnosed with autism, one of the deficits they identified was that I struggled with imaginative play. I wonder what they would think about what I do now. If the PBS special pops on the TV, that'll be fun. But there is something about whether you're disabled, neurodivergent, but also people with other minoritized identities, they sometimes lose access to this part of themselves. They're not given permission or space to do it, or the ways that it's socially acceptable kind of fall away as you leave childhood. Our second core value is that play is a human right. And maybe it sounds like I'm overstating this a bit, but right now not everyone is allowed to play. We don't seem to believe as a society that everyone is entitled to downtime or to being creative or to trying things out whether or not it's profitable. So there is a deep kind of anti-capitalist politic underneath this in the sense of how disability justice perceives of that term. That our value should not be determined by what we produce. Our value comes from being humans, the innate dignity that all human beings have. And you sort of have to jump on that train before you can get to the idea that play is something we all deserve. Our third one is really important in the development of our tools, which is that systems have to be flexible to be accessible. We're not going to find one, I really hate the phrase magic bullet because it's not like a bullet has really solved anything. But we're not going to find this one thing that will make the game accessible for everybody. We're not going to find one version that will work for everyone. Instead, we have to make systems that have a lot of flexibility built in, and we have to make multiple solutions. In our case, it also means coming along and partnering with other organizations who are better at other stuff than us. We don't make Braille dice. We know people who do make Braille dice. Let's let them do that, and let's make sure we work together so we can support the cognitive accessibility, they can support some vision accessibility, and together we're going to get to a better place. But in other cases, it means we need multiple versions of the exact same tool so that it's not just, oh, this is pretty. Well, is it going to work for somebody who's colorblind? Or what if your printer cannot handle the intense amount of color for this file? Well, we need to make some black and white versions that are just as nice. There's a lot of different ways that this manifests. Our fourth one, with apologies to Joseph Campbell, is that we do not believe there's one hero's journey. This is quite a fight to pick in a random presentation. But a lot of the notions about monomyth are rooted in whose myths and stories did the study start with? Who was included? Who was pushed a little bit to the fringes if they didn't fit in that storytelling? And I love a good monomyth. I'm addicted to Star Wars. It's my native language. But we want to make sure that there is room for every type of hero, for everybody's particular story, that they can see themselves and they can explore new ways of being a hero. Sometimes I joke that I'm a bardbarian and that I'm very likely to play the bard class and be charismatic and, creative and all of that. Other times I need to go into a rage strategically. So that barbarian bit comes out, which is the very problematic name of, of that subclass, or of that class. But there should be a lot of different ways that we can explore what it means to be a hero. Our last one, and the one that I think is most important for what we're talking about today, is that we look to those most impacted for leadership. And this does come directly from the 10 principles of disability justice. Trying to honor the fact here that we cannot live up to the principles of disability justice in the neoliberal academy, certainly not, but also not in 2026 America. But we can hold these things up as something to measure ourselves against, ways to identify how we're succeeding, how we can do better, and like keep striving toward those principles. And this one of looking to the people who are most impacted by a problem for leadership and how to solve that problem is both very intuitive, it makes a lot of sense, and also almost never happens, especially with the disability community. So in our case, sometimes it's literal. I mean, most of our team members don't fit in one way or another in what you would perceive as people succeeding in academia or succeeding in the gaming industry. But it also means that we go beyond our team to the people that are struggling most to access something, to figure out what the problems and obstacles are, and to find ways not just to benefit from the advice they give us and all of that labor and wisdom and experience they're sharing with us, but make sure they're compensated for that. Make sure they're feeling part of our community and part of our team, and they can take credit for this thing that they're creating. So once we identified, hey, here's a big problem and a nice little local problem that helps us feel like we're doing something about that big problem, and we know what our goals are and we're articulating these values, what comes next? I think the weirdest thing about my team, historically speaking, is that it's filled with music scholars. And music theorists and musicologists seem completely unrelated to the problem at hand. But what's actually important is that we build the team based on people who understand the mission. I mean, we added a Jewish studies scholar now, so that'll fix it, right? That squares that circle. No, but I mean, if people understand the mission and they know what you're doing, you can then find what is this little piece of the problem that we can tackle with who we are. But it's the people that get the mission that's more important than the competencies. You can find more competencies, you can gain more skills. It's really, do you get the missions and the ethics and the values of what we're doing? The second piece of this is that we talked to a lot of disabled neurodivergent folks, and we played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. That sounds funny, but the only way to build this tool was for me to play all of the different classes, to actually get the game from the inside out, to figure out what is working for people and what doesn't. Also to find out the ways that people are already cripping tools and things that exist to play the game. Because just anecdotally, if you go to a gaming industry convention, you're gonna meet a lot of people with autism and ADHD and various other neurodivergence. We seem overrepresented. So the fact that stuff isn't built for us is very strange, but it also means we have been finding ways and learning from the finding ways to start offloading some of that labor from each individual person and start sharing those solutions. And lastly, we needed to figure out what they still needed help with. And for us, initially, it was cognitive accessibility. It was just the tremendous cognitive load of trying to play this game and keep track of way too many things. So then we started designing, and then we reiterated, and then we reiterated again, and then we started over, and eventually we got there. We have a motto at Open the Gates Gaming: graphic design is my passion. None of us are graphic designers, and this is always said sarcastically. We have hired some tremendous graphic design students, but we've also had to pick up skills, and graphic design turns out to be one that's essential. This image on the slide now is the logo for Open the Gates Gaming. It is a hexagon, and you can see a little bit of indication that it has a three-dimensional shape. It's standing in for a 20-sided die, which is sort of the universal symbol for tabletop role-playing games, because we needed this image to be something that would immediately read as part of the gaming industry. We also wanted it to show this sense of adventure and going on a journey together. So there's a pathway that leads from where the viewer is away into the mountains, honoring coming from here in Virginia Tech and in Appalachia more broadly. We have very bright colors because we wanted it to be very fresh and inviting. And interestingly enough, this red is a lot more infantilizing than when we were using pastels, which is some feedback we were able to get from the community. But one element here that's subtle but important is this rising portcullis, or very kind of medievalish gate that is lifting up and is the thing that's letting you through. Open the Gates Gaming may be the most literal naming I've ever done, because we are just here to prevent gatekeeping. So how do you stop gatekeeping? You open the damn gates. So yeah, we're super creative. We did have to, though, we had a ton of names. But we had to figure out what was resonating with people when we talked to them, that they were getting the values. The thing that landed us here in the end was just seeing what was available. If you're going to name a project that's dealing with the community, you have to go find out what web domains are available, what other websites would have similar names where people might accidentally end up. The .coms versus the .orgs. You've got to go on every social media platform and every web hosting platform you think you might use. And Open the Gates Gaming was free on all of them. So even though one of our core team members wasn't at that meeting, we just texted her 20 times and we're like, oh my God, we feel like we have to go ahead and reserve all of these, because if we blink, like, one of them will go missing, because we'd already had a name that we lost, which I can't even remember now. And I was so upset about losing it. But this one ended up being perfect, and we grabbed it and ran with it. Which, that business of naming brings me to one other point that I feel like is not discussed enough. There are so many devalued tasks in trying to do transdisciplinary work. And when I say devalued, this is work that takes so much of your time, so much time to learn what the work is, and so hard to translate in your faculty reports. So hard to explain to people why it's necessary, why it should count, that I kind of have given up on some of these, but there's several of you that I'm about to ask this summer for your help with figuring out how to do it. There are 3 screenshots here. One is from our community Discord server. One is from the Open the Gates Gaming website. And the third one is from our Twitch channel. And you may be like, why are you streaming on Twitch? That's an excellent question. This project has taken me down avenues I never would have anticipated. But once we had started developing some tools, getting playtesting behind us, figuring out that it works, going through the IRB, all of that, we realized we had to get those tools out to people. And if at the end of the day, the tools were being created to help people play D&D, because the problem was that disabled neurodivergent people were facing social exclusion, we can't actually deal with that problem of connecting them to communities and helping them build community unless we get the tools in their hands. And maybe we actually also have to help build that community. So that's where all these pieces come into play. We knew we needed a website because everything we were making is under a Creative Commons license. That means it's going to be free forever, it's non-commercial. It also does allow people to make derivatives of it, but they have to then stay on that same non-commercial license, let more people make derivatives of their work, and then always kind of cite backwards. So somewhere on the website where it's hosted, it'll just say, we got this from Open the Gates Gaming initially. And there can be this legacy of building and connecting. But that means you need a website to host it. Well, that website's also going to need to start explaining who you are. But maybe you have to go actually get the tools in the hands of people. So we start doing events out in the public. I never imagined we were going to be at these national gaming industry conventions with tens of thousands of people. That is a very weird story of we're just starting to make friends in the accessibility industry until someone has an idea that we can come in and help them with. We get connected, we go in, we learn how to do event administration, we learn how to travel with all this equipment, and we just do it. And once we get the tools in people's hands, we know that it'll make a difference. But that's why if you don't have a website that's clean and functional, they're not going to be able to find what you're giving them. The Discord community has actually been central to our mission, not just once we meet people, connecting them back and helping them find people to play with online, but also it's produced tons of volunteers who are increasingly becoming core members of the team, who will write for us, who will play test things for us, who will step in with skills that we don't have, like creating our beautiful owlbear mascot that I'll hopefully be sharing with all of you in a few months. That like community hub becomes essential to actually getting feedback, to actually making sure that we maintain community, like being community driven. The Twitch stream is hysterical to me that I accidentally monetized a Twitch channel. I didn't think anyone would want to hear a bunch of professors sitting around talking about tabletop role-playing games, and apparently that's not true. Because a couple days after we witnessed the birth of Raging Janet, we had a fan find us in the wild who apparently watches us on Twitch and thinks we're awesome and needed a whole group of friends supporting her so that she could get up the courage to talk to us. And all of us start crying thinking about it. But if we weren't out there kind of in conversation with the community, like last night we were able to interview someone named Matt from Mimics and Misfits. This is someone who started in kind of streaming video game space, moves into tabletop, sees a need for more accessible tabletop design, has an idea, built that product, play tested it in our room at the Access Forward Gaming Lounge at PAX Unplugged in Philly, now has a Kickstarter, and last night we were able to interview him on the stream, and the Kickstarter was fully funded with our community bringing him over the finish line on the stream. Like it's wild. It's things you could not imagine happening, but it all comes back to, is your logo legible? Do people know who you are? Can they find you? Are you posting enough on social media that you show up on their algorithm so they even know that you can help them? If they want to get involved, can you help them get involved? Managing volunteers, all of these different pieces. And I'm not going to claim I'm doing any of these well, but I will say my team is getting better and better at it, and then we see more people join in the work. Because now I can articulate that our solution to this problem, it's a little more refined now. Rather than a therapeutic intervention, we offer an opportunity for neurodivergent and disabled people to find community. So in other words, we have to quickly tell people we're not therapeutic gaming. You could use our tools for that. But we're not interested in trying to make people less autistic by playing D&D. Because in my opinion, we're making everyone more autistic by playing D&D, but that, I don't know what the psych department thinks of that. The weirdest part was honestly when my psychiatrist was like, hey, we're starting a gaming thing, but I'm like not a great DM. And I was like, well, I can help you with that. Is that ethical? And then I had to tell him about a very questionable thing my character did on a horror live stream, just so he was clear that that was the character and not me. It gets awkward, friend. But what we're interested in is community, because to us, community is the answer. Like, whether you're interested in therapy, I mean, I love therapy, clearly I go to therapy, clearly I need a lot of therapy. But therapy is ultimately about helping you find your community, helping you build people in your life and build a life where you're connected to other people and you're making a meaningful difference and you feel like you belong. So we're kind of more on that side of the mission, the community side. As people tell stories together, they're going to navigate differing communication styles and access needs to solve problems creatively, practice standing up to tyrants, and rediscover their own powerful voices. Some of our Dungeons & Dragons modules confront ableism directly through operas and Latin American folk songs, but every adventure empowers players to combat stigma and isolation through collaborative storytelling. So the outputs from this project are a little bit all over the place. On this slide, I've got an image of Dakota Vaughn and Gustavo Arauz rolling some dice and playing on camera for us, playing together to showcase the community. In the center, there is a large group of us, including alum Doug Cockle, the voice actor for Geralt of Rivia, if you're a Witcher 3 fan like I am. Yeah, he's a Virginia Tech alum, and he's been an incredibly important member of the Open the Gates gaming team since he joined the advisory board. We're there at our very first PAX East with our very first table showcasing our tools. We've also got dice that have our logo on them because we want to be able to give gamers something fun when they help us, and Virginia Tech doesn't like when you give people money for participating in research. So we give them dice because they need it to play the game. We also have, I've asked Lyndon, helpfully passed out some copies of one of our tools, the decision guide. I've got this, there's like a stack of them in this picture. This is actually a version of our decision guide that was put in kits given out by Guardians Mental Health. And these were their tabletop kits, especially for people who are neurodivergent or dealing with anxiety. And it is one of their top 2 best rated tools of all time for including in their kits. So they have disseminated our stuff to hundreds and hundreds of people. And then lastly, I have logos from a lot of organizations we work with, from the Dots RPG project that initially got us into communication with ReadPop, the folks that run PAX, Guardians Mental Health, the PAX Together program, which is the diversity and inclusion initiative that we work with, and then Nomnivore, a wonderful gaming company that focuses on neurodiversity, and their founder, Derek, is also on our advisory board. So to give you an example of the development, I've got 3 different versions of spell cards. So in Dungeons & Dragons, you can do magic. that sounds like so much fun until you try to actually do it. In the top corner, there are these two small cards. They print out 9 to a single sheet of paper. So they're very small. These 2 cards with incredibly small text are actually just for one spell called Find Familiar, which is basically you get a magic little friend, like a little animal. That's your buddy. But it takes that long to print out the spell text. Our first version is in the middle here. It's outlined in green. And we were able to reduce the spell text, simplify it, standardize the appearance kind of across all of these spells. So it gives you exactly what information you need when you need it and nothing else. So this is what you actually need when you're playing the game at the table. The green color lets you know that it's a first level spell. Apparently, no one had ever bothered to color code spells by level before. This was a wild discovery we made because we assumed everybody would be doing this. Instead, they're like, all wizard spells are one color. So if you're a wizard, all your spells are the same color. So color is a completely useless design feature at that point. We also include textures and numbers and things on the back of this card. So we're not relying strictly on color, but it is a really helpful tool. Then the last picture of, I'm 99% sure this is Dakota Vaughn's hands, holding an array of spell cards shows you our current design, and I have some versions up here y'all are welcome to look at, or we can pass around if you want, but of what these look like now, where you have different colors for the different levels of spells, giving you something tactile, so it's not just a list of stuff you can do, it's like a real thing you can hold and remember how to use. You can sort. It makes it so much easier for people to use their magic. I have an example character sheet by Hasbro. This is their stripped down version that's only 3 pages, super tiny, super black and white, super intimidating and borderline, I don't know. This sheet is what kept me from playing Dungeons & Dragons for so long. It just doesn't look fun. Sean's having a moment because Sean knows the original versions of these sheets, but I'll have to let you tell that story.
4 years of playtesting.
Yeah.
This is what they ended up with, a simplified version.
Black and white, long lists. It'll have spots where you like write down your spell information that aren't big enough to put the spell information. And again, just as a list, nothing tactile, nothing to hold on to. A lot of times you're just supposed to reference a page number, so you grab the right book to open the book to look at the thing, instead of putting the thing on the character sheet. This was the first draft. I'm not going to spend a lot of time just letting you see that we have a couple iterations, but we simplified this to one sheet of paper that's 2-sided. One side for exploring and talking to people, so those 2 pillars of play, exploration and social interaction. One side for combat. Instead of like blood red, we went with pinks and maroons for combat because it gave enough of that feeling that it was combat without being scary. And the green and blue initially was honestly just grass and sky. It was the really literal reference, but it seemed to resonate with people that it felt more open and exploring. Our current versions are sleeker. There's a lot less extraneous art. The individual shapes for each field give you an indicator of the function of the field. Most important, most frequently referenced information is at the top and center, and then more specific things towards the bottom. Just noticing there's a blank slide here. I don't know why that happened. But now we've kind of expanded to being able to go to things like the American Musicological Society and Society for Music Theory's Joint National Conference and present in their exhibit hall to show people how they can use this to, we have a lot of modules we've created where they can practice confronting ableism and sexism in opera narratives through tabletop role-playing games. Because it hits really differently if instead of just talking about how messed up this thing is, you drop your students into the situation and they have to deal with the problem. Like it resonates much deeper. But also a couple social media advertisements and a quick picture of us at the Cedar Cultural Center in Minneapolis in November, where we were able to run a community event. Some of our tables were people that were in town for the conference. One of our tables was Minneapolis locals who started playing D&D together a week after this, and as of last month are still playing D&D together, oftentimes online with everything happening with ICE. It's safer for them that way, but they have plans to be in person very, very soon. I know this all sounds lovely, but the thing I need to tell you is that sometimes doing this feels like shit. So I want to give you a little bit of the underbelly before I open this up so we can have more of a conversation about it. There's a lot of parts of disability work that we don't really like to talk about because you might say, oh my gosh, gaming, this is such a fun project. And people are so excited to join our team. I make them come and do an event first, unless you're Sean, and then I'm like, hey, can you go to Boston in 3 days? And for some reason you say yes. But most of the time, we make sure they come to an event and try it out before they're like really a core part of the team because they need to find the highs and the lows. And to talk about these lows, I cannot stop quoting J. Logan Smileges. I cannot pronounce this last name no matter how many times it's told to me. It's like my mouth won't make it. But he wrote this fantastic book called Crypt Negativity. We don't talk about the negative enough, and we really need to because that's what gets you through the positives. And all the way through the negatives and to find the positives again. He writes that the thrust of crypt negativity lies between this will to believe and the strength needed to sustain it. I believe, along with Munoz, Kafer, and Lee, in the possibility of a different future. I will myself into believing every day because without that will, I'm not sure I could keep myself alive. If I thought that there was no future at all for disabled people, well, I don't think I'd see much purpose in surviving the present. But I also acknowledge that some days I don't have the energy to think much about the future, let alone pursue it. Some days my bad crypt feelings are felt so cripply that I live in a heap of tears and blankets. Sometimes I feel despair, total fucking despair. While a part of me is tempted to read these days and times as aberrations, temporary departures from the longer oeuvre of my affectivity that is, perhaps, less intensely pessimistic, I want to honor the depth of my bad crypt feelings as no more or less aberrant than the bouts of optimism I feel at other times. For me, finding those bouts of optimism again always comes back to the why, and I'll lean on S.E. Smith's essay, The Beauty of Spaces Created for and by Disabled People, to get at this a bit. This is in Alice Wong's edited collection, Disability Visibility. When talking about what a crypt space is, and specifically referencing attending Alice Shepard and Kinetic Light's performance of Descent, S.E. Smith wrote, "There's something weighty and sacred here. It's very rare as a disabled person that I have an intense sense of belonging, of being not just tolerated or included in a space, but actively owning it. This space," I whispered to myself, "is for me." Next to me, I sense my friend has the same electrified feeling. This space is for us. So ultimately, this is going to be about creating that sense of space in a brief moment of time when we encounter them, but also giving them the tools to keep creating that space and to pass that space on to more people. So there are more spaces for disabled people to belong and to feel like an us instead of just a me. I am so long-winded and I want to get to chatting with y'all. But one metaphor I like using here comes from music, and I won't give you too deep of a lecture. But in music, when we talk about textures and we try to describe these sounds we hear, we can make a lot of categories, but I'm going to talk about two. When we write about harmony, a lot of times we're taking for granted that there may be one voice that is leading the way. There's this one melody, and then everybody else playing or singing is going to line up in chords that are supporting that one voice. There are progressions and patterns that they fall into, but they're taking their lead and their cue from one thing. And I see a lot of transdisciplinary and collaborative work that works this way, even some that's really good about being community-led. They're like, well, here's what the community wants. We follow this voice. We have patterns that fit. It's transdisciplinary because each one of us comes from a different discipline. But we're kind of following that set pattern. We're following the lead of one person. And I think this is not truly transdisciplinary. I feel like as an autistic person and in the legacy of people who talk about neuroqueerness and everything taken from in crypt theory from queer theory, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it, you cannot be supportive of autistic people. I know we just left Autism Month, but you can't be supportive of autistic people or neurodivergent people if you're not supporting the trans community. And I think there is something here about breaking down all of these barriers and boxes, and the neurodivergent inability to fit that can become an unwillingness to fit that can actually become a source of creativity in research, in art making, in storytelling, in gaming. And I think our projects need to follow that line too, this desire to push outside of the box. Now, if I'm saying let's not just have one voice that's more important that's supported and everyone lines up, what's the alternative? Chaos? Yes, the alternative is beautiful chaos. And leading a transdisciplinary research team is about letting everybody you're collaborating with have their own voice. We have people who join this team and they're more interested in working on narrative. We have other people who are super focused on mechanics. We have some folks who actually just want to play Magic the Gathering and they're just biding their time until we're working on Magic the Gathering, and that moment is here. I seriously was offered $1,500 to send people to MagicCon this weekend. But it was, that offer was made like 4 weeks ago, and there was no way for us to turn it around that fast. But like, that's the desire for that to exist, right? And for me, the beauty of a transdisciplinary collaboration is embracing how messy the community is. Not all autistic people want the same thing. There is no one voice from the disability community. However, when you let everyone have those individual voices, you respect all the labor that goes into complaining, and you do the emotional labor of accepting that and learning from that and thanking them for that in ways that really improve their life. Then leading one of these projects is a lot more like directing traffic, and that's where I kind of draw from this musical metaphor of polyphony. If you hear fugues from Bach, or what I had here was the grosse fugue from Beethoven, but I'll spare you that many lines of chaos. A lot of times you're trying to find ways to have independent musical lines. Where will you line up? Where can we form these moments of nice, pretty harmony? How can we support each other? How can we propel each other forward? It also involves being in crypt time together, moving together, waiting for your moment when, yes, we can shift to talking about Magic the Gathering. And sometimes you are going to come along and just support somebody else's line, somebody else's component of the project. But it lets us produce outputs that are much richer. So towards that, I'm starting to identify an approach that I'm calling access forward of doing this work that really is about doing disability work, but I think some of you may find it applicable to different projects you're pursuing. The first one is that I named this access forward because it's about access and not accommodation. It's about having things baked in from the beginning. It's about making sure we're seeing this as not just disability, because we don't lead single issue lives. We're thinking about not just are wheelchair users able to, play a character in a wheelchair in the story, but also, are we assuming everybody is white? Are we challenging some of the settler colonialist narratives in these stories? We have to make sure that the accessibility is also socioeconomic, all of these different factors. So I'm not so interested in accommodations. They probably will happen. I'm happy to look at things individualistically if they come up later, but really thinking about access in its beautiful complexity from the outset. The second one here is that it's really more of like an access failing forward approach. Like, failing is the hidden word in this phrase. You have to prepare to mess up. You have to prepare to fail. Learn from that, document it, be transparent about it. Practice owning up to your mistakes, because that does not feel good as an academic, to stand up here and be like, I screwed up. But we learn so much more from that, and we also build trust with the community when we acknowledge that we messed up, we work on doing better, and then we come back and offer them the next step. Then they're going to trust us with their criticism. They're going to trust us with their time and all of the experience they have from living disabled lives that they can bring to our project. The third one I've mentioned, like finding the North Star. Well, for an access forward approach, inclusion is the North Star. Inclusion on every beautiful, messy axis. How can we schedule our retreat so we include as many people as possible and people don't feel left out or pressured or anything else? Ooh, is that hard? Because you're letting go of all these things you didn't know you believed about how people should want to sacrifice to be part of your project, When do we let go of a partnership with another organization because they've lost sight of this? And for them, they want to collaborate with us just to raise money or for their ego. It's hard. When do I let my team call me in if I'm not pursuing this? And that brings me to 4, which is that leadership in this approach is collaborative care work. I learn a lot more from people Leah Lakshmi Pipiazna Samarasingha's care work. I carried that with me constantly for years. Let This Radicalize You is the next collection that I can't seem to let go of. I know that Leah's poetry is probably better. I love Leah's poetry, but those essays too. Learning from people that do organizing work, that do work in the community, because if we're trying to do community-led work, we need to learn from those people about how to interact with the community, how to take care of each other, which is something that is never going to be valued by academia, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because otherwise, like if the way we're treating each other isn't living up to our values, our product isn't going to live up to the values. Like we can't treat each other like garbage among our team and then expect that when we go out and deal with community members that are difficult or have different needs than we anticipated, that we're going to be able to bring that ethic. Also not saying I do this well, but am saying I try to give my team opportunities to call me out and call me in as needed. This last one's so important though. The idea that a better future is actually possible, that's so hard. And Let This Radicalize You, the authors talk about holding hope and despair loosely and together. Holding hope and grief together. Because it's not just believing that we could have a better future and telling stories about it and dreaming that better future, but it's holding onto the responsibility that we have to work together now to build it. Not the whole thing, but whatever little corner we have. So I guess what I'm saying is hold on to Raging Janet, whether or not the FAR appreciates her, because I mean, it is possible. We can get there. We can make differences. The last anecdote I'll leave you with is one that I didn't witness personally. Well, I witnessed the first half, not the second half, and I only put this together last week. Last year, our very first gaming convention ever, I was working at the table and handing out the tools and giving my sales pitch to convince people to try it. And yes, this is really free. No, we're not joking. And someone came up and was struggling to speak because she was very emotional. And she circled back and circled back again. And the third or fourth time she came by, she had calmed down enough to talk. And she said, Dungeons and Dragons was my world. It was how I made friends. It was how I socialized. It was all I talked about and thought about. And then I had a traumatic brain injury, and I can't play it anymore. And sorry, this resonates with me because I was training to be a trumpet player, and my disability took away my ability to make music, which is how I've related to my friends and family. So I get that feeling. And she's like, can I take a couple of these? Can I try it? Because it had been, I think, about 9 years, and she hadn't been able to get back there. And she's like, I can't even make friends with the people that have traumatic brain injuries because they didn't play this before. You know, so I feel so lost. She came back this year and I got the report from one of my team. They're like, someone came back and said they had a TBI 10 years ago. They got our tools last year and now they can play. So she has it. She has her friends again. She has community. She's making friends. She's coming back and like, learning how to run games now. Like, can we make tools so you can run games even if you don't have a lot of working memory, even if she's not trying to fix her brain. She's trying to work with it to have that thing that actually matters. So, I don't know. I know that it can be frustrating. I know that I'm the one that's complaining to some of you about, oh gosh, they don't get it. I need to figure out how to translate this work better. People don't understand it. But, yeah, when I'm retired, I don't think I'm going to care about what my score was on my FAR if I stayed in academia, but I'm going to care about Raging Janet. So thank you all so much.
So we'll open the floor for questions.
I love that I told you I couldn't talk for 50 minutes, and then I talked for 60. Thank you all for your patience. I do have versions of, oh yeah, we've got some poetry up here, Tongue Breaker with Leah Lakshmi Professor Samarasinghe. I know, I like them both. I like them both. But yeah, no, it's great. I also do have copies of our character sheet spell cards up here if y'all want to like take a look at things and we can pass around because it's easier to see in person. If you're joining us online, the website's openthegatesgaming.org. We also bought .com, so it redirects to .org. Yeah, we're a little thorough at this point. Please include the word gaming, otherwise you will come to a religious organization. It's like things I should have tried before we got the URL. But yeah, their tools are free to download there. Anything you can't find, you can send us an email and let us know. We'd be happy to connect.
Hi, thank you. It was a great talk. So I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, you talk about the social exclusion. I played D&D, and I played one of the campaigns in F5E.
Yeah.
my question is, how much do you think this social exclusion can be related to the cultural differences in the core of the story? Because, and of course the language. I mean, many spells, many weapons, even the cards are originally rooted in Norse mythology or even Tolkien's world, and maybe people from other. I mean, even if it's translated to the other language, it doesn't have that cultural spirit in that element. I would like to know your opinion about that. And also, I have another technical question. Kind of, you've seen that we recently have we kind of have the shift from physical tables to more large screen tables. And do you think those design methods you talk about are respected in the current design of these large screen for playing D&D or not?
I love these questions. Please remind me of the second one if I missed part of it when I finished answering the first one. But to the first one, this is absolutely the problem. So when we started, we got, I was like, oh, I can fix this fast with a small grant from the library with a team of like 3 people. I was so convinced that this was gonna be like a really one-off project, that we'd help make it more accessible. We were gonna make spell cards, the decision guide that's in front of you that helps get people, you know, in the storytelling world and knowing what to do and less stressed. And then also something that helped them build their character in the first place. And we're done. Very quickly we learned that actually the problem is that there's a lot of racism and sexism built into this, that the stories that we tell are sometimes just as bad. So there's a branch of the project where we actually offered the first bilingual Spanish and English games in the PAX Together intersection at PAX East, and we continue to offer those. But we're thinking about quest settings, different cultures. We've got one person creating one that's rooted in Latin America, but if the colonists didn't win. Another one that's very much based in the African diaspora and different syncretic religious traditions in there. We're starting a study of different TTRPGs that are, I just asked you how to say this yesterday, how to phrase the different Jewish themed TTRPGs. You had to, don't worry about it.
Phrase that I don't feel like anyone else would be comfortable saying, but at PAX East I discovered like a random collection, or put together a random collection of like 5 or 6 tabletop role-playing games, all set in like 19th century Jewish Eastern Europe.
Oh, so things like, so now a new project that's looking at stuff that's set in like realms with Jewish folklore and getting through those. Like these aren't D&D specifically, but how can we look at these different modules? What are they doing well? What can we draw from? Because absolutely the stories being told, the way that the books are written, have their own layers of problems, and it preferences certain types of people over others. Some of the pushback we get is that they want D&D to be elitist, which is one reason why we have to keep going, well, we're not actually changing the rules, we're helping people access it. Because there is pride among being as difficult and esoteric as you possibly can. And this gets at the heart of what I think really is the root of ableism, which is the emotional labor required to recognize that you did harm to someone and that your self-worth is very much actually rooted in ableism. I think about Jay Dolmage's academic ableism and the discussion of how many universities have huge staircases, usually leading to big gates that need to be opened, if you will. But this, or even here at Virginia Tech, where like our history is rooted in being very able-bodied. And if you start challenging all of the ways that somebody's excluded, you realize it's a little bit arbitrary that you succeeded and these other people didn't. So there's this type of emotional labor you have to do before you can even get to the listening to disabled people. And I think we see something similar with tabletop games, where there is a growing community that's interested in inclusion, but there is a diehard group that is wanting to perpetuate exclusion. Like the more esoteric the story is. I've heard, I got in an argument with a queer person of color who was hosting these absolutely horrific, homophobic, racist games because he was like, well, I just believe that they should have the right to play whatever they want to play. And I was like, I didn't know how to respond to this. It's like, it's part of the culture sometimes, unfortunately. Then you also have linguistic barriers where it's always, like, historically, English has been preferenced in a lot of these games. So we've seen people creating external supplements. We've seen criticism within Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, the people that are producing the Dungeons & Dragons materials, trying to do better. But this is an active branch of our project, is looking at the narrative components, and then on, like, what stories are we telling, what's the setting, what's the folktale. But then also, when we move things closer to plain language, we haven't hit plain language standards yet, but as we get closer and closer to plain language standards for disability accessibility, it's also opening it up from people from different cultures and different, like, languages and different familiarity with English to be able to play. But you're definitely onto something with these baked-in components. The second part about digital spaces, one of the reasons we do the Twitch is because it forces us to take our tools online, and also because we got the opportunity to play D&D with Doug Cockle and Amy Vorpal, and I've played with this guy that goes by Jax the Whipper online. So it's like, I'm not going to turn those down. Some of the design principles hold. This summer, we're doing a series of, like, agile development sessions that are going to be focused on the latest round of feedback we got, redesigning the tool from the ground up so it's easier to work as a digital and screen reader friendly PDF, and also so people can start pulling spell cards from a database and having them auto-populate. So I feel like that's when we'll really find out how many of these design principles translate to, like, computer-only play versus being at the table together. So yeah, that was a very long answer, sorry.
Thank you, great presentation. I really appreciate it. I'm going to humble brag for a second. My son is a producer in the board game industry. And so if he was someone who is looking to be more inclusive with game design, a lot of what you've talked about is taking existing games and making them more accessible. Have you started looking at what are some things you would think about for trying to get at the other end, at game design, how they could be deliberately built with accessibility or inclusion in the design end, not necessarily to change the overall intent of the game, but make it so I don't have to add accessibility issues on the other end. What have you looked at, maybe setting some standards or things that could be maybe given to industry as something that could be used by teams who are developing games that would make them think about that in the production process?
Love this question so much. First off, if your son's interested in consulting sessions with Disability Forward Research Consulting, the grant runs out at the end of the year. But for now, Ashley and her students can put together teams and pay disabled consultants to interact, which is, like, the best way to find out how it's going. One of the newest things we implemented at PAX East this year was some office hours in the Access Forward Gaming Lounge for game devs, so they could come in. And we had a couple of board game folks, we had a tabletop person, and a few video game people, so getting folks from different industries. There's more standards for accessibility in video games, which is wild because video games still aren't doing great, but there's more money in it. Able Gamers, for all their good and bad, was able to do more advocacy directly with companies to get them to start adopting these standards, but they're still a little hit or miss and all over the place. There's nothing right now for board games. The biggest challenge for board games is the production costs, because a lot of things that would make something more accessible, like having pieces that are different shapes, having patterns and colors, all of this increases your production costs exponentially. So we're starting to kind of build up a roster of people we've talked to and met through these events who are all interested in it so they can pool their knowledge. It's definitely an emerging piece. Like, this project started very focused on TTRPGs, but our most recent outing for the Access Forward Gaming Lounge, we had video games running. We had so many board games come in and request to add more board games. Pokemon TCG has taken off in a huge way, the Pokemon trading card game. So I think this is an emerging area. There's a student here who's just graduating with a computer science degree very quickly, Dakota Vaughn, who's been mentioned a lot. This sounds like an advertisement for Dakota today, but it should be. Dakota's awesome. Dakota will be joining a different college here at Virginia Tech to do an MFA in creative technologies. And what he's been working on is how to teach people to design games, and in the process, you're teaching them to design accessible games from the ground up. So it sounds like we need something similar for that. The people that make the dice for us, a company called Roll for Initiative, which is a family-run place, they all have different disabilities, but they don't advertise it. But that ends up meaning they create these super accessible dice. They just started this other company that does like building board games and like all the production stuff with that. So they would be a really cool family to talk to because they're very honest and straightforward about costs and factories and industry secrets behind it. But so far there isn't one. I'd love to see it. One thing we learned from Nomnivore, one of the companies we partner with, and their founder and president is on the advisory board for OTG. One thing we learned from them, because they also produce board games and tabletop games, is that there is not a lot of research, if any, in like actually grounded research on accessibility in games, which is why I want to bring it to Virginia Tech. The games minor, or the games and simulations minor, and the disability studies minor are both under the Academy of Transdisciplinary Studies. ICAT has been really supportive of a lot of disability studies work and central to the game stuff. The library is interested in both. Like, I'm really hoping we could be a place where that happens in the future. But yeah, would love to be in touch with your son or anybody else too. Yeah, thanks.
So Fabian has a question
Mhm.
online. He says, thanks for your amazing work. I would like to know the ways access forward ideals resonate with your teaching practice.
Love this question, because the teaching version is no one's ever happy. So what I mean by that is when I try to take this access forward approach, a lot of times I'm trying to look at like what is the main focus of the assignment. Anytime I'm hit with an accessibility challenge while teaching, I have to take a step back and go, why am I including this anyway? And sometimes the answer is I don't need to include this. I can find something else that's more accessible and I'm getting the main point across. Other times I run into stuff like students aren't reading as much before they get to college, so they can't get as much out of longer articles, so I need to switch to shorter articles. I've shifted to doing a lot of annotations because if they don't like actually write on the page, it doesn't stick, but when they write on the page, they remember it. So I think a lot of that access forward approach with teaching is getting creative and flexible with assignments, trying to remember what the main point is, like holding on to that inclusive North Star. A side effect is that students that are used to the traditional way of doing school and excel at that get really uncomfortable when you start changing that up. Whereas students who don't fit as well, they'll succeed. So it feels like any shift you make, half the class is super happy, the other half is super mad. So you have to get really comfortable with with getting criticism, even from the students that would usually go in a class and say this is perfect and wonderful. But I think the most important piece is rethinking the relationship between instructor and students. I'm not the only one that does this, but I draw a lot from like inclusive pedagogy and universal design for learning and co-creating things wherever possible. And I think that can be really important. It's tough in a music classroom because there is still no, not just no industry standard, but no method that works at all for creating alt text for music scores. And Braille music notation can't actually be used to perform music or to study and analyze music. There's no way to do that. And yet most of our coursework revolves around teaching students to read and analyze and perform written music notation. So that's one of those moments where what that pushed me to do was to start trying to create a group that could solve that problem. I thought I was putting together the Avengers and letting them loose with people in accessibility and music theorists and musicians who are blind and all of that. There were so many people that volunteered that the entire initiative was destroyed by just the administrative and bureaucratic hurdle of including everyone who wanted to help be part of the solution. So I'm hoping once I can wrap up a couple of my current projects and grants, that will be the next one that I can kind of take on. But I think that's an example of how you have to acknowledge like the limits of the pedagogy. You have to take the failures and then plan to move forward in a better way. Find ways to get honest feedback from students that's anonymized and they feel like they can actually give you. But I have not figured that out yet. Let me know if you do though.
Thank you. So this is a question about transdisciplinarity, and it's a very personal one. I'm so impressed, and I spent a few years of my life intensely engaged in the universe of ICAT, and what was so attractive to it was so many of the things that I think you're doing the very best representation of, which is like inclusion, polyrhythm, and care, and also all the shit work you just described that nobody sees or pays attention to or wants to acknowledge. But what I really took from your talk was how, in your perspective, care is really essential to your definition of transdisciplinarity. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about some of the tensions, because on the one hand, I think that world embraces that notion, and then on the other hand, as you said, like people want to associate the work you're doing for all different other kinds of reasons. And then at the same time, when you're in that space, it feels like the most inclusive environment, and the environments you're creating sound amazingly inclusive. And then you just said, like, and yet everybody wants to join in, and then it can't be inclusive and it falls apart. So I'm just wondering how you're kind of navigating some of those tensions.
Yeah, there was a version of this talk where I was like, here are things you need to be prepared for, and one of the slides said whiplash. Because at any given moment, my inbox is filled with people telling me that I'm amazing and people telling me that I'm terrible and not going to get tenure. And sometimes it's the same people on all those emails. Not even joking, like just to be transparent about that. And we're encouraged to do transdisciplinarity and rewarded for it, but then also kicked for it on the other side. It's funny you mentioned ICAT, because ICAT, they were the ones that first bet big on this project. They gave us $25,000. They let us elevate this. We stole Gustavo from them. No, I mean, he's still at ICAT, but like I've had so many conversations about getting things built into MOUs and that sort of thing to get more and more of his time. Because one thing I love about the staff at ICAT is they do a lot of this grunt work that we would not be rewarded for. They're there to do that. Room scheduling and all of these things. But yeah, I think the care piece is also very gendered a lot of the time. I had to be very deliberate building my team. There was a joke for a while about, like, when I had a grad student join, they were like, hey, so which one of the people doesn't know that they're neurodivergent yet? Because those were the two options. Either they were neurodivergent or didn't know they were neurodivergent. Our team has changed and grown a lot, but we think a lot about identities and like who the people are that come in, and kind of having some concentric circles in the sense of a senior team versus going outward. And I'm less likely to pick the person that has a huge background in a particular skill set that we need than a person that I can actually be in community with, that I can play games with, that I know will apologize when they messed up and will try to do better. So some of that care work is also so much relationship work. It is really funny to have an autistic person in the middle of this. On the other hand, since autistic people communicate differently, the double empathy problem comes out of some experiments that seem to demonstrate that autistic people are actually better at understanding non-autistic people's communication than the inverse, and that we have to think about it more and we have to be more intentional with it. So I've leaned into that a lot. But a lot of it really is about taking the time to evaluate who's in it, who's got it, who's figured out what's going on, checking in with each other. We have a retreat coming up where we have a day that needs to be just celebrating the wins and playing games together. That's all we're doing that day, because we need to start with that mindset before we can get into the arguing. None of that is valued, and yet it's essential. But I do think that if we want to say a better world is possible, we have to go out on a limb and risk things to build it sometimes. And we don't get these really cool scholarly outputs that are appreciated, the essays that are being written, the articles that will be published, and all of that. And the impact with the world, unless we do those pieces. So yeah, I mean, some of us know that our therapists know each other, and we wonder if they talk about our project, because we have interpersonal issues, and we actually try to put in the effort to work through them. I try not to fall too much into a therapy-ish speak sometimes, but there is just this ethics of care and commitment to the other person. So getting comfortable having the really, really uncomfortable conversations has helped us. Doing a lot of work over food and shared meals, and actually enjoying spending time together and taking a step back if we need to has mattered. It's also unfortunately meant sometimes like you got to let people go for a lot of reasons, whether it's like this is not aligning with their goals, they can't put the time in right now, their job isn't going to allow it, and trying to leave the door open to welcome them back in when the time is right, but also sometimes stepping away from opportunities when the values aren't there. We've also just been super lucky. I need to say that. I can't believe, there's a lot of times, you know, when you're an academic and you're pre-tenure, you're told you gotta also keep your application materials in order because you're gonna have to apply other places no matter what, and it'll help bargaining if nothing else. It's so hard to imagine leaving these people, like this group of people. We've already had some of our team leave and relocate, and they are just as involved as everyone else and making them come to Blacksburg soon. So yeah, it comes down to those relationships at the end of the day. Which, funnily enough, these are things we learned at the Dungeons and Dragons table. So make time for play is the short version, I think.
Last question.
Hi, this was so lovely.
Thank you.
I have a question more about gameplay. I noticed earlier on in the slides, one of the things that you noticed as like being, that you said was like a barrier was like how much time D&D takes, like the time commitment. And I was curious if you guys had ways of getting around that, because normally sessions do take like 3 or 4 hours if they're like contained well, and sometimes it feels necessary because of how immersive the game is. But I was curious if you guys had ways around that too.
Y'all are asking every question I couldn't have even dreamed for you to ask, because I get to brag about something. Yes, this continues to be an issue. It's also why we have to work so hard to play together, because it's so easy for game nights to get canceled. Very recently, one of the newest things we've created that we're excited about, which also was part of how, Annette and her friends with cerebral palsy could play, my disability includes like things in my vocal cords, so it kicks up every now and again, was having shorter modules, having ways to kind of single out these experiences. So our first answer to that question was, we want to make sure that, yes, we'll help people get through a session 0 and safety tools, but we can get through character creation, we can dive into playing quicker, there's less of the stuff that's boring and slow. So we have a choose your own adventure story that helps you pick what class to play. We have pre-gen sheets, so you can just print everything out that you need and start at level 3 once you picked your class and roll quickly. But after our second convention, we noticed that if we had events that were like an hour or less, we were turning people away by the dozens. But we were having trouble filling the longer games that were 3 or 4 hours. So my immediate thought was, we need to offer more short experiences. And is there a way to break an adventure up into smaller parts so that you can just play little discrete units? And one of our community members took this and ran with it. He's an engineer who's given more money to Virginia Tech than his home institution, because he keeps donating when we do live streams to raise money for Giving Day with Doug Cockle. I played D&D with him on Sunday nights online. That's it. That's his entire connection to the project. But he has come and run games for us at like the conventions in Boston. He created one adventure that breaks into 3 modules. There's like a 60-minute social interaction, a 60-minute puzzle, that's very much that exploration pillar, and then a 90-minute combat. This thing was so in demand that we're gonna have to run it many, many more times moving forward, even though we were at the video game con and it was in demand, not the tabletop gaming con, which we go to in the fall. So we're experimenting a lot with this idea of like, can we break things up into smaller chunks? The funniest side effect of that was it actually turned into the longest game ever, because there were people that would come to the first one and then stay in the room the whole day to play every part. But our kind of next, so we've got Magic the Gathering that needs to take off. We need to do cleanup work on the tools and some digital infrastructure work. We've got to write everything up. But we think our next big set of tools is going to be supporting the DMs, the storytellers, the people running the sessions. And this is one thing we're developing. The other one is like a play module where you come up with what your characters are as you're playing. So as soon as people come, you can do some conversations around safety and topics and how we indicate like if we need to take a break and those conversations. And then you just start playing. Then by the end of the session, you have your character. But then also how to help people create stories that are smaller, or like maybe you don't have a plan at all for what happens. So we're right now just started live streaming Brindlewood Bay on Thursday nights on Twitch. And then last night we used our Twitch stream to interview Matt from Mimics and Misfits and his duality system that successfully kickstarted. Now there's stretch goals for the next few days if you want to see it. But his system also has mechanics like this where you don't need quite as much prep on the storyteller side. You can just be reactive and you can make a good experience with the time you have. So I don't have the answer yet, but there's like a lot of interesting, fruitful ways where we might start finding answers. Because you're right, I know when I was running games at your house, you're like, this is boring. Can I walk away? Yeah. Yeah. Ashley has multiple characters based on her dog Daphne, and they're all wonderful. One of my favorite moments was still when you agreed to be on film for something that proved our tools worked that we did for like a Humanities Week presentation.
That's my first time playing.
Yeah, you played a bard and cast Dissonant Whispers, this like spell where you're whispering and that magic is actually doing psychic damage to an enemy, and you just whispered, begging strips. It was amazing. You're like, I'm not a gamer. I'm like, no, you're actually the OG gamer, so. But yeah, not one answer, but a lot of answers. And also, if you want to help be a part of the answer, just let us know, because we'll happily, yeah, build on that. I should stop recruiting people and let Lyndon wrap this up.
Yeah, let's go ahead and give Elizabeth another round of applause.
Thank you so much.
So Janet has an announcement she'd like to make real quick, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, again, want to thank our wonderful speaker. That was an amazing way to wrap up our seminar series. I just want to remind everyone, if you haven't made suggestions for next year, you can fill out the form or just email us if you're just like, there's this one person I want to invite and you can't deal with the Google form. Just get back to us any way you can, because we'd really love to incorporate your feedback and suggestions. Thanks.
I also want to just end the semester by thanking Lyndon for all of his really amazing work in holding this together, and we've all gotten a lot of messages from him, but there's a lot behind the scenes as well. So really, thank you, Lyndon, for stepping up.
Yeah, of course. Well, I also want to thank Janet and Jim and Saul and the Athenaeum production team, because we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So big round of applause. But yes, thank you all again, and see you next year.
May the force be with you. I was like, oh no.